Few states have as strong a claim to being the home of American politics as does the state of Virginia. It was here that the first permanent English colony in North America was established at Jamestown, all the way back in 1607, making it the birthplace of the United States in many respects. Virginia has subsequently produced 8 of America's 46 presidents, more than any other state. 4 of the nation's first 5 presidents came from here: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Needless to say, Virginia holds a major place in America's politics, which means that voting patterns here are important. They have been changing of late, with a shift from this being a Republican stronghold to a Democratic state, and this change has implications for America's wider politics, as we explore here. Let's just backtrack here to give a very brief summary of Virginia's politics since the foundation of the United States. US politics was a much more fluid affair back in the first half of the 19th century, and Virginians voted for many parties and candidates, from Democratic, Republican figures to Whig Party candidates in the 1830s and 1840s, and even the short-lived Jacksonian faction in the 1820s. But as the modern two-party system began to develop from the mid-19th century, Virginia skewed Democrat, favoring the party that was anti-abolition in the years prior to the American Civil War. Virginia was absolutely central to that conflict, and the Confederacy's capital was at Richmond in Virginia. In the aftermath of the conflict, as segregation and the Jim Crow laws replaced slavery, the Democrats became the party of the former Confederacy states in the South. It's hard to conceive of it today, but back then the Republicans dominated politics in northern states like New York and out west in California, while the electoral map from Virginia and Georgia west to Texas was solid blue. Things began to shift quite quickly around the middle of the 20th century. This was part of a wider realignment in American politics. For a century, the Democrats had been the party of the southern states, but beginning with the New Deal of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s, they gradually shifted to become a party of liberal progressives. This included championing the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s, and as this occurred, there was a rapid shift through which southern states went from blue to red. The political map of America completely changed from what it had been since the mid-19th century. To get a sense of this, consider that between the 1876 presidential election and the 1948 presidential election, Virginia voted on all but one occasion for the Democratic candidate. The exception was in 1928, when the Democratic candidate, Al Smith, was intensely disliked in Virginia on account of his Roman Catholicism. That all changed in the 1950s and 1960s, as Virginia joined the realignment of the southern states to the Republican Party. Beginning with the state giving its electoral college votes to Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, Virginia voted red in every presidential election for the next 50 years, the only exception being in 1964, when the state narrowly voted in favor of Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater. In some instances, the support for the Republican candidate was overwhelming. Nixon won 68% of the vote in Virginia in 1972, Ronald Reagan won 62% in 1984, and Bush Sr. won 60% in 1988. Virginia had become a Republican stronghold. Something has happened in Virginia, though, in recent times. While most southern states remain fairly firmly Republican in their voting preferences, especially so as one heads westwards to places like Tennessee, Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana, Virginia's politics has changed over the last 20 years. In 2008 and 2012, the state voted for Barack Obama in the presidential elections. It supported Hillary Clinton by a significant amount in 2016, with the former First Lady acquiring more than 200,000 votes more than Donald Trump, while Joe Biden trounced Donald Trump here in 2020, acquiring nearly 500,000 more votes than his rival. And this is reflected in other electoral results in Virginia. The Democrats have won 4 of the 6 gubernatorial elections held here in the 21st century. The Republicans have not won a Senate race in Virginia since the long-serving Senator John Warner retained his seat back in 2002. Clearly, Virginia has once again become a blue state after half a century of Republican dominance here in the second half of the 20th century. So why has Virginia's politics shifted so much in the last 20 to 25 years? The change in the 1950s and 1960s was part of a wider reorientation of American politics at that time, as a result of the civil rights movement and other issues. But the change is more specific to Virginia in recent decades. Multiple factors are in play. For starters, there is a growing suburbanization which has been underway in Virginia for 30 years. This is highly important. More than there being red and blue states in America, the real political divide is between town and country. City and town dwellers, no matter what the state, tend to vote Democrat, while those in rural areas vote Republican. Therefore, Virginia's growing urbanization has benefited the Democrats. Elsewhere, the change has been in terms of ethnicities. Back in 1990, the census recorded that nearly 80% of all Virginians were white. That figure has now fallen to close to 60%. As a result of a large influx of Asian Americans and other minorities that tend to vote overwhelmingly for the Democrats. There are now 500,000 Asian Americans in Virginia, many spilling over into Virginia from the suburbs of Washington, D.C. This is a community in which nearly 90% of those aged under 30 vote Democrat. A corollary to this is that while the African American population of Virginia has remained consistently around 18% of the total for decades now, more black people who are eligible to vote in Virginia are voting, and voting Democrat. Consider that Donald Trump actually acquired 200,000 more votes in 2020 in Virginia than he did in 2016. The only difference was that approximately 500,000 more people voted in the state that year than had done so in 2016, with Biden acquiring well over 400,000 more votes than Hillary Clinton did 4 years earlier. What does all of this mean for the US presidential election in November 2024? With national polls suggesting that Trump is only marginally ahead, the likelihood is that Biden will manage to carry Virginia again. However, nobody can predict what might happen in the months to come, particularly so when two candidates with a combined age of nearly 160 are squaring off against each other. One thing is for sure, if the Democrats can mobilize their voters in the state in the manner which they did in 2020, then a large turnout should result in a comfortable Democratic victory. But with apathy growing concerning the economy, American foreign policy, and inertia in Washington, a large turnout of the kind seen in 2020 cannot be taken for granted.